Cool. So quick poll. How many of you have heard of progressive web apps? Okay, a few of you. Well, hopefully by the end of this talk, not only will you know what a progressive web app is, but you'll all want to go off and build one, or at least implement it in whatever business you work on. So I'm going to talk about progressive web apps specifically in the media context. And a bit of background on me: I am a product manager on the Chrome Media team, a colleague of Matt, who just spoke about AV1 and VP9. And our team, or Chrome as a whole, has been relatively focused on progressive web apps as a way of improving the experience on the mobile web. So why are we having this conversation? Well, the mobile web has always been good at content discovery, but on the engagement metric, it tends to lag native apps. And if you have any doubts about that assertion, take a look at this data. You see that across the top 1,000 mobile apps compared to the top 1,000 mobile websites, mobile web does relatively well when it comes to just the number of users coming through. It's almost 3x what you have across the top 1,000 mobile apps. However, when you look at engagement, apps really dominate. You have almost 20x the engagement as measured in minutes on native apps. So that is kind of the more organic side of discovery. What if you are looking to advertise and pay for user acquisition? Well, even in that context, mobile web tends to be a way more cost-effective way to get users. A company called Housing.com in India studied this, and they found that their mobile web user acquisition rate was a 50th of what they were paying for a user for their Android app. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to add capabilities to the mobile web to bring up the ability for users to engage with it and have meaningful experiences over longer durations of time, whilst retaining all the inherent advantages that exist with the mobile web in terms of discoverability and low user acquisition costs. So here are the elements that have been missing on the web that prevent an app-like experience, or used to prevent an app-like experience. With an app, users are able to launch into it from their home screen. They're able to use it regardless of whether they're online or offline, or whether they have spotty connectivity, and they get push notifications to tell them when there is new and interesting content. With something called progressive web apps, we've addressed all of these. And rather than me kind of try and formulate a way to explain this to you, I think this article did a good job of eloquently stating it's taking the best of the web and best of mobile apps, and it's bringing that experience using web technologies. So to a user, it acts and feels like an app. So what does this look like to an end user? Let's walk through an experience. So say a user has visited your media site, and you have given them the option to add to home screen, which you can now do. If they choose to take you up on that option, what they will see is an icon on their home screen. So in this case, Biograph is the sample media PWA that we built out, and they're going to tap on that app, and when they do so, it will open up in a full screen experience. There is no evidence of any browser UI. It feels like an app already. Furthermore, if they try to use the task switcher, notice that it will show up as a task or an app on its own, as opposed to as Chrome browser, even though under the hood this is all just a mobile website. So it's Chrome that's powering it. When they update their version of Chrome, they will get the latest and greatest features that we're building in there. And by the way, the reason this is called progressive web apps is because we understand the notion that not all web APIs get adopted by all platforms at the same time. So these are built in a way such that they degrade gracefully. So if you are using a browser which doesn't have part of the capabilities that a progressive web experience entails, the user will still be able to interact with it and get most of the advantages. Just that one web API will not be available, or the benefits associated with that one web API will not be available to the user. So this experience is completely transparent to the user. As a developer, there is a mechanism for you to build it such that it degrades gracefully. So once you're in the experience, a user is likely going to browse the app, and this is a media app, so they're looking for a video to watch. And then they decide, hey, that specific video up top looks interesting, so I'm just going to hit play. And notice that it starts playing almost immediately. There is no buffering lag. And the reason for this is we are using service workers to pre-cache content. I'll get into more of what that all means in a second. But to the end user, it means that the video starts playing back instantly, and that's always a good thing. Another thing I want to call out is the ability of the mobile web, not just progressive web apps, but the mobile web in general, to do good full screen experiences. Historically, this has not always been the case, but as you can see here, you have a full screen video playing back where you have controls show up and the ability to scrub alongside the preview as you scrub the seek bar. Also note that you can easily build in controls like costing, and in this case, because progressive web apps allow connectivity or use even when you're offline, you have the ability to download a video or offline a video for later consumption. One of the pieces of progressive web apps which really polishes it is the ability to surface controls into the layers which are typically only available to the OS UI. So for instance, lock screen controls. Using something called the Media Session API, you are now able to customize the backdrop of the lock screen with the album art of the media currently playing, as well as surface controls, so that if you are serving up a media type which is typically used when a user is driving or on the subway and is doing other things, they can control it using the lock screen, and also in the drop-down the notification taskbar that shows up in the OS. I talked about offline briefly, and this really shows that when you're offline, so this phone has just been turned into airplane mode, and a video, encrypted no less, is playing back without any issues because it has been previously offline. When the animation cycles, so this is the part where it's being put into airplane mode, and notice that some of the thumbnails have dimmed opacity to indicate they're not available offline. So these are things you can do intelligently when you're developing a PWA to ensure that a user knows what content is available to them and what isn't available to them. So we just walked through a user experience, which hopefully you thought was pretty slick and app-like. Let's break that down into what made that great. Well, we had fast playback. We had the ability to watch anywhere because there's no longer a dependency on having good connectivity. You had good UX in the form of controls surfacing up all the way through the OS UI stack, and the ability to do full screen video. Now, what's the benefit to you as a media provider? Well, when you have instantly playing videos, you don't see a user drop-off associated with buffering. Because the video plays back instantly, the abandonment rate is low, so you retain everyone who came to watch the video in the first place. Let's go into how this all happens kind of under the hood. I talked about service workers earlier, and the way to think about service workers is they're really the heart and the brain of the progressive web app. Service workers are a JavaScript client, or rather a client-side proxy written in JavaScript, which serves as the arbiter of any network requests that are being generated by your mobile web page. The service worker decides whether a request needs to go to the web server or needs to hit the cache. And it can also intelligently create requests for assets that you think the user is likely to need. So for instance, if you have a video that is a large banner video on a page and you expect the user is likely to click on it, you can pre-cache the manifest as well as the first segment of the video such that when they hit play, it plays back instantly. So offlining is great for at least two use cases, which I'll talk about, but there are probably far more than this. One is you're getting on an airplane or you're going on a subway and you know you're not going to have connectivity. Great, you can offline it ahead of time. Another significant use case is emerging markets where spotty connectivity, unfortunately, is a fact of life, and having this capability lights up both use cases for you. The Fullscreen UX I talked about, there's an additional aspect I want to call out. Not only do you need to make sure that you have a good full screen playback experience in terms of controls and scrubbing and so on, but also the very act of rotating a phone to landscape typically indicates user intent to go into full screen mode, and we've provided a way for you to easily do that. Now, I promise this is the only slide I have which shows any code, but this is mainly to highlight the simplicity of implementing something like this. And again, if you come across a browser that doesn't have the screen orientation API support, the experience will degrade gracefully, so that you're not leaving users with a broken experience. Another inherent advantage of using something which under the hood is really a mobile website is that there's a URL for every page, for every asset. And you can build in share experiences either in your app or just rely on the user realizing it's a URL and sharing that on social media, email, whatever channel they choose. Now, the advantage is twofold. Not only are you benefiting the person who is using the app in the first place, the progressive web app in the first place, but also any recipients of it, when they visit that URL, they're directly thrown into the progressive web app experience. So they get all the benefits we talked about. They get you can prompt them to add to home screen, so they get kind of the app-like experience that we showed end-to-end earlier. And this is something that if you're thinking about native apps doing the same thing, oftentimes they require you to install an app, or they might have a web experience to fall back on, but it won't be as good as a progressive web app unless they've built it out with that in mind. There are many approaches to going about to build a progressive web app. You can obviously build from the ground up and incorporate all the HTML5 video best practices, use the right codecs, VP9 or AV1, depending on when you're doing that. But you also have the ability to enhance an existing site. So you can add in a service worker to an existing site, and it's particularly good if you couple that with some sort of experimentation. So you could have a beta running where you try out service workers and you actually measure what the impact of the enhancements you're building in is. And hopefully you'll see the kind of results that I'm going to talk about in a minute. Before I get there though, I want to call out that HTTP is on a deprecation path, so any work you're doing on your mobile site, you really should be moving to HTTPS at the earliest. This will enable you to use many of the more newer and more powerful web APIs, which are increasingly not going to be supported with HTTP. With progressive web apps, HTTPS is pretty much table stakes. So let's talk about sites that have had success with progressive web apps. We're going to go to Voot, which is a site in India, a media site in India. It's a subsidiary of Viacom18. And when they implemented a progressive web app, they saw some pretty tremendous gains. 80% drop in page load times, which led to a 20% or 19% reduction in bounce or abandonment rate, and an 86% decrease in data transfer for repeat visitors. So this is really your service worker and pre-caching at work. What those pieces are doing is they are caching content locally, and because they're caching it in a way that can be used offline, the next time a user does visit your site when they're online, the service worker will check whether it needs to pull down an asset. If it's updated, great, it will pull it down. If not, then you're saving all that data transfer. This is kind of where the rubber hits the road, and what Voot saw is 77% increase in visitors, conversion from visitors to video viewers. This is their bread and butter. Session time per user went up significantly, almost 40%. And then their average daily video views per user also went up 15%. So not only did they see a better user experience, they could very concretely see that translate into more people coming onto their site, more people using their site, more people watching videos. I want to move on to a slightly separate topic, and this is to do with size. So PWAs inherently tend to be a lot smaller than native apps. This is because you don't have to compile in any of the binaries. All of the pieces that you need are really in the browser. The key pieces you are distributing with a PWA, or you're serving as a website in a PWA, are your service worker and any assets that are regularly loaded when you load up a website. And this has a couple of advantages. So number one, the user does not need to pull down as much data when they're visiting your experience. And number two is that they don't have to pull down updates every time, right? And with apps, this can mean tens of megabytes multiple times a month, a week, or however frequently you update your experience. And for you, it means that you can be assured your user is always on the latest and greatest version of your experience. You don't have to be worried about users who are orphaned in an old version because they choose not to update their app. So with that, I'm going to wrap up. There are a couple of links out here which you can use to try the experience that we talked about earlier, the progressive web app media experience. And there's also a pointer to the GitHub code where you can go in and build the PWA and modify it to your heart's content. Thank you.